On the last evening of the 19th century, Paris seemed to breathe more slowly, as if it had decided that haste was not required for crossing into a new year. Winter lay gently over the rooftops and chimneys, softening the sharp lines of slate and stone. The sky was a deep, patient blue, the kind that did not demand attention but offered a quiet shelter above the city's familiar silhouettes. Along the streets, the gas lamps did their steady work, each flame held carefully behind glass, each glow gathered into a warm halo that made the cold appear almost friendly. The air carried the faintest trace of snow, not yet falling, only suggested, like a thought that had not chosen to become a sentence. Beneath that calm sky, the city prepared for midnight as one might prepare a cup of tea, with unhurried hands and a preference for warmth over spectacle. Camille Delaunay walked alone, not because solitude was required, but because the evening felt designed for it. He was not young enough to chase noise and not old enough to fear the quiet. There was a steadiness in him that matched the night, a composed patience, a willingness to let the world arrive in its own time. He wore a dark wool coat that sat neatly at the shoulders, a scarf arranged with modest care, and gloves that smelled faintly of leather and cedar from a drawer at home. His steps were measured, neither slow nor fast, but tuned to the gentle rhythm of Paris at rest. Each footfall on the stone seemed to settle the day behind him, leaving only the present moment, clean and simple. Rue des Martyrs rose ahead, a familiar incline with its mixture of shops and small doorways, its modest elegance, and its everyday grace. At this hour, it had the quiet dignity of a room after company has gone, still warm, still lightly perfumed by what had just been, but already returning to itself. A bakery was closing. The last trays pulled back from the window, the final crumbs brushed away with a soft cloth. A grocer stacked crates with the calm competence of someone who had done so 1,000 evenings before, and would do so 1,000 more. In a narrow storefront, a seamstress extinguished a lamp, then paused to check a bolt on the door as though she were tucking the shop into bed. Paris, on this night, did not pretend to be anything other than what it was, a city made of small labors and ordinary kindness, held together by stone and habit and light. Camille's gaze followed the line of lanterns as they climbed the street, their glow spaced evenly like pearls on a long, dark ribbon. He found comfort in their steadiness. Each one offered the same promise, that the next few steps would not be taken in darkness. It was a simple promise, and yet it felt deeply generous. The lanterns made the world more legible, and therefore less demanding. Even the shadows looked softened, as if they had been asked to behave. There was no sharpness to the night, only coolness, and the mild sting of winter that reminded a man he was alive without insisting that he prove anything. He passed a small kiosk where newspapers had been stacked into neat piles, their headlines crisp and urgent, though their urgency seemed faintly out of place. The papers spoke, as papers always did, of politics and industry and the restless march of progress. They mentioned exhibitions and engineering, the glitter of new machines, and a future that sounded bright and fast. Camille did not stop to buy one. He had read enough of tomorrow to know that it arrived regardless. Tonight belonged to lanterns, to the hush between one year and the next, to the slight sweetness of a street that asked nothing of him except to walk. As he continued upward, a scent drifted toward him. Warm chestnuts, their skins split and curling, releasing a gentle smoke that carried a faint sweetness. A vendor stood at the corner, not calling out, not pressing for attention, simply present, as if he were part of the street's furniture. The brazier glowed softly, a small hearth in public, and the vendor's hands moved with slow assurance. Camille paused, not out of hunger, but out of gratitude for the simple beauty of warmth offered in winter. The vendor wrapped a small paper cone and handed it over without ceremony. Camille thanked him, and the words felt sincere in the cold air. He held the cone between his gloved palms, letting the heat seep through the paper, and for a moment he stood very still, listening to the quiet life around him. A carriage rolled by, its wheels muffled against the street, the horse's breath visible in pale puffs that vanished almost as soon as they appeared. The sound of the harness was soft, a faint jingle like distant bells. Somewhere farther down, a door closed with care. A voice laughed briefly, one quick note of happiness, then lowered again into conversation. The city was not silent, but it was restrained, as though everyone had agreed, without speaking, that loudness was unnecessary. Camille could imagine the brighter streets near the Grands Boulevards, where crowds gathered and champagne waited, where midnight would be greeted with a kind of jubilant insistence. But Rue des Martyrs seemed content to let the new year arrive like snow. Gently and without demand, he walked on, taking one chestnut at a time, letting the taste be simple and warm. The street's slope brought him nearer to Montmartre, and with each step, the air felt a touch clearer, as though the city's breath rose and thinned. The shop windows reflected lantern light in long, golden streaks. In some windows, displays had been arranged for the season. Ribbons in pale colors, gloves in careful stacks, a few delicate ornaments that caught the light and returned it in soft glimmers. Camille watched these reflections without any wish to own what he saw. It was enough to let the world be beautiful at a distance. There was a special peace in that kind of looking, appreciation without grasping, wonder without urgency. At a certain point along the street, near a small church whose stones looked darker in winter, Camille noticed a lantern that seemed newly lit. Perhaps it had been dimmed earlier, or perhaps the flame had only now been strengthened. The light within it appeared more alive than the others for a moment, as if it were awake in a deeper sense. It shone not brighter, exactly, but steadier, as though the flame had decided to commit itself fully to its task. Camille stopped beneath it. The glass was clear, the metal frame painted a dark green that seemed almost black in the night. The lantern's glow warmed the pale stone behind it, and the warmth made the wall look as though it held a memory of sunlight. There was nothing magical about a lantern, he told himself. It was a practical thing, a flame, a mantle, a bit of gas, a fixture maintained by men who climbed ladders in all seasons. And yet, standing under it, he felt a small shift inside him, like the turning of a page. He thought of the year about to end, the small disappointments, the quiet satisfactions, the days that had passed without leaving much trace. He thought of the century about to begin, with its promises and inventions and unknown shapes. But the lantern did not speak of grand futures. It spoke only of this, that light could be made and offered and shared. Camille's breath rose in a pale cloud. He could hear the faint crackle of the lantern's flame, or perhaps he imagined it, a sound so delicate that it belonged more to the mind than to the ear. He looked down the street and saw the next lantern waiting, then another. A chain of gentle assurances leading onward. In that moment, a tender thought came to him, unforced and simple, that the night did not require him to do anything extraordinary. It only required him to keep going, one lantern to the next, one calm step after another. He resumed his walk with the paper cone now lighter in his hands. The chestnuts were nearly finished. but the warmth remained in his palms. He passed a small shop where toys were displayed, wooden animals and painted tops, and a doll with a porcelain face that seemed strangely serene. A child might have looked with longing, but Camille looked with quiet amusement. There was something touching about objects made for play, about the way they suggested a world without consequence. Tonight, even adults seemed permitted a gentle return to that feeling. The city itself felt like a toy town under glass, protected, illuminated, safely held within the curve of the winter night. As he neared the top of Rue des Martyrs, the street broadened slightly, and he could sense the presence of the hill beyond, the pale outline of Sacré-Cœur in the distance like a sleeping ship on a dark sea. The wind was a little sharper here, but it did not bite. It only reminded him to pull his scarf closer. Behind him, the street continued its quiet rituals of closing and settling. Ahead, Paris waited with its warm interiors, cafes where light gathered in windows, rooms where music might drift softly, tables where a cup could be held between two hands. Camille felt no need to hurry toward any of it. The night was long, and it had the generous patience of a story told slowly. Under the next lantern, he paused again, not because he was uncertain, but because the act of pausing felt appropriate. He listened to the city's low murmur, to the faint movement of distant life. Somewhere, very far away, fireworks might already be prepared. Champagne might already be uncorked. But here, on the quieter street, the turning of the year had not yet demanded celebration. It simply existed as a gentle approach, like the sound of footsteps in an adjacent room. Camille looked up at the lantern, and then down at the street, and then forward to the soft line of lights continuing into the night. He felt, with a calm certainty, that he could follow them without fear. The lanterns would lead him to warmth. The city would offer him small kindnesses. And when midnight arrived, it would not strike him like a bell. It would settle around him like a shawl, soft, familiar, and welcoming. With that thought resting quietly in his mind, he walked on, letting Paris guide him upward, lantern by lantern, into the calm heart of its winter new year. At the crest of Rue des Martyrs, the night opened into a quieter breadth, and Camille Delaunay felt the city's air change, as though the hill itself had filtered it, making it cleaner and more delicate. The lanterns continued their patient line, but here they seemed less like guides and more like companions, walking beside him in steady intervals. He turned onto a side street where the stone facades held the cold in their pores and released it slowly, and where the windows, mostly dark now, looked like closed eyes. Yet among those sleeping panes, there was one that remained awake, and it did not shine harshly, as theaters did, or glitter insistently, as grand restaurants might. It glowed with a calm, buttery warmth, a light that seemed to soften the very air around it. From the street, the cafe's windows appeared like golden pages in an open book, each one holding a scene within, quiet enough to be read without strain. The sign above the door was modest, painted letters slightly worn by rain and time. Inside, the light did not blaze from a single chandelier, but gathered from a few lamps placed with care, as if brightness were something to be arranged gently rather than commanded. Camille paused before entering, not out of hesitation, but because he felt the familiar pleasure of watching life through glass. He saw a man at the counter, wiping a cup with slow precision. He saw a couple leaning close, their heads inclined as though they were speaking to the table itself. He saw an old woman knitting without hurry, her hands moving in a rhythm that suggested long practice and quiet satisfaction. The room seemed held in a soft spell of calm industry, each person occupied, each person unbothered, and the warmth inside looked like something you could step into the way you might step into a bath. When Camille opened the door, a small bell chimed, not bright, but polite, and the cafe's warmth met him without drama. It carried the scent of coffee and bread, and something faintly sweet, like vanilla or almond, lingering near the display of pastries. The air was thick with comfort, and it made his cheeks feel suddenly aware of the cold they had endured outside. He removed his gloves slowly, as though there were no reason to rush the body's return to ease, and he shook the snow suggestion from his coat, even though no snow had yet fallen. The cafe owner looked up, not startled, only attentive, and offered a nod that contained no question. It was the kind of nod that said, "Yes, you may be here. Yes, this is a place for the quiet." Camille chose a table near the window, where he could see the street's lanterns and the slow passing of winter shadows. He sat with his back supported by the chair's curved wood, letting the room's warmth settle into him the way a soft blanket settles onto the shoulders. The tabletop was smooth and slightly worn, bearing the faint polished marks of other hands and other evenings. A small vase held 2 pale flowers, perhaps kept from an earlier day, and even in their fading they looked peaceful, as if they had accepted their own gentleness. The cafe's sounds were subdued. The soft clink of porcelain, the low murmur of voices, the occasional whisper of a chair moved a few inches along the floor. No one spoke loudly enough to break the room's spell. No one seemed inclined to. The server who approached Camille was not hurried. She was a young woman with hair pinned neatly at the back of her head, and her expression held the calm competence of someone who knew how to carry warmth from one table to another. She did not ask questions that demanded decisions. She simply offered possibilities in a voice that was like a soft cloth. Coffee or hot chocolate, or a small glass of wine warmed with spices for those who wished to feel the winter from the inside. Camille asked for coffee and for a small pastry he could eat slowly. The server nodded as if he had chosen correctly and drifted away with a lightness that did not disturb the air. As he waited, Camille let his gaze move through the room, not intruding, only observing. Near the back, a man read a newspaper under a lamp, but his posture was relaxed, as though he were reading less for information than for the mild pleasure of turning pages. At another table, a pair of friends sat with chess pieces arranged, yet their hands hovered rather than moved, as if they were more interested in the quiet companionship than in victory. A woman with a fur-lined coat draped over her chair wrote a letter, pausing after every line to look into the middle distance as if she were listening for the exact tone of gentleness she wished to send. The cafe was not a place of spectacle. It was a place of small, careful acts, each one offering a kind of rest. Camille's coffee arrived in a cup that seemed warmed already, and the first scent that rose from it was comforting in its familiarity. He wrapped his hands around the porcelain and felt heat move into his fingers. Outside the window, a lantern's glow trembled slightly in the glass, and inside, the lamp above his table cast a circle of light that felt like a private room within the room. He took a sip, and the coffee's bitterness was mild, softened by milk, the taste lingering like a low note in music. The pastry, light, flaky, with a small seam of fruit, crumbled delicately and asked to be eaten without haste. Camille ate slowly, not because he wished to prolong the food, but because the act of slowness itself felt like the evening's proper language. Somewhere beyond the cafe, faint music drifted in, so distant that it might have been imagined, yet steady enough to be real. It was not the bright brass of marching bands, nor the exuberant clamor of celebrations in the main avenues. It was a waltz, softened by walls and winter air, reduced to a gentle pulse that seemed to move through the city like a sleeping heartbeat. The melody rose and fell with a kind of tender patience, suggesting a room where couples turned slowly, not to impress anyone, but simply to enjoy the feeling of being guided by rhythm. Camille listened without turning his head, as if the sound belonged to the cafe itself, and he let it settle into him like warmth. He noticed, after a few moments, that the cafe owner was watching the door in a particular way, as if waiting for someone, not anxiously, but with the calm attention one gives to a kettle that will soon begin to sing. A man entered, a tall figure with a hat dusted lightly by the night's dampness, and the owner's face softened into recognition. There were a few quiet greetings exchanged, not the kind that demanded conversation, only the kind that acknowledged shared familiarity. The newcomer removed his hat and scarf, revealing hair the color of ash, and he moved to the counter where the owner poured him a drink without being asked. In that small exchange, Camille felt something that soothed him. The sense that this cafe was woven into the neighborhood like a thread, connecting people gently, holding them without tightening. The windows continued to glow toward the street, and Camille realized that to someone passing outside, the cafe's interior would look like a warm story, contained in rectangles of light. He imagined a person walking alone under the lanterns, glancing in and seeing the quiet figures, the cups, the soft lamps. That passerby might not enter. It might be enough simply to know such warmth existed. The thought made Camille's chest feel a little lighter, as if he had been reminded of something important and ordinary, that comfort can be witnessed, not only possessed, and that the world contains many small rooms of peace, even on nights when history insists on making a grand turn. The waltz outside seemed to lean closer for a moment, or perhaps the wind shifted, carrying it more clearly. Camille's mind began to wander in the slow, gentle way it often did when he was warm and unhurried. He thought of the words people were using for this turning of the year, this crossing into 1900. They spoke of a new century as though it were a door to be thrown open, as though one had to step through with confidence and noise. Yet here, in this cafe, the year did not feel like a threshold that required courage. It felt like a page turning on its own. It felt like a lamp being trimmed so the flame would remain steady. It felt like a city drawing a deeper breath. A soft snowfall began at last, so light that at first it was only a change in the darkness beyond the window. Then Camille saw it, small flakes drifting down, catching lantern light for the briefest moment before continuing their patient descent. The street did not transform dramatically. The snow did not demand attention. It simply arrived, as if it had been invited, and it moved with a quiet grace that made everything look slightly softer at the edges. Camille watched it for a long time. The flakes were slow, unhurried, and their movement had the gentle hypnosis of a lullaby. The cafe's glass held the cold outside and the warmth inside, and the world on either side of it seemed equally calm. The server returned to ask if he wished for anything else, her voice still soft, still measured. Camille asked for nothing new. He only asked that his coffee be left a little longer, and she nodded, understanding that his request was not about the drink, but about the continuation of the moment. She moved away, her steps quiet, and Camille sat with his hands around the cup, letting the warmth rise toward his face, letting the waltz remain distant, letting the snow fall in silence. The hour felt suspended, like a lantern hung carefully from the night, and the cafe, with its glowing windows, seemed to offer not only shelter, but a kind of gentle permission to slow down, to rest, to let the new year approach without resistance, as softly as snow settling on stone. When Camille Delaunay finally rose from his table, it was not because the café had become less welcoming, but because the warmth inside had done its work. It had softened the tightness in his shoulders and quieted the restless corners of his thoughts, leaving him steadier, as if his mind had been gently folded and put away. He placed a few coins on the saucer with an unshowy care, pulled his gloves on slowly, and nodded once to the owner in a manner that required no conversation. The cafe door opened with a mild chime, and the cold met him again. But now it felt lighter, less insistent, as though the night had learned that Camille did not intend to fight it. Snow was falling in patient little flakes, and the street accepted them without changing its mood. The lanterns continued to glow with their soft halos, and the damp stone seemed pleased to be cooled and softened further. He walked without any particular destination at first, letting the city guide him the way it sometimes did when he allowed himself to be guided. His steps carried him down gentler slopes, away from the hill's sharper air, toward the lower streets where Paris gathered around its river like a quiet thought returning to its origin. The waltz he had heard near the café remained somewhere behind him, fading into the fabric of the night, replaced now by subtler sounds. The hush of snow meeting rooftops, the muted roll of an occasional carriage, the faint scuff of a passerby's boots. The city felt wrapped in layers, stone, winter, lamplight, and within those layers a calm pulse continued, slow and reassuring. Camille's breath rose in pale clouds that vanished almost as soon as they appeared, and he found something soothing in that brief visibility, the way warmth could show itself for a moment, then dissolve. As he neared the Seine, the air changed again. It became wetter, gentler, carrying the faint scent of water and iron and cold reeds. The river, even in winter, had its own presence, quiet but unmistakable, like a great animal resting under blankets. From the bridge, Camille saw it moving below, dark and smooth, reflecting lanterns in trembling lines that stretched and broke and reformed with each small current. The snowfall made the water look even calmer, as though the surface were listening rather than speaking. Paris's bridges stood steady above it, their arches holding the night like cradles. The lamps along the quay cast pools of light that seemed to float, and the buildings on either side rose like patient guardians, their windows mostly dark now, their facades softened by the falling snow. Camille turned along the embankment, taking the path beside the river, where the bookstalls usually sat in their long row, their green lids closed like sleeping eyes. At this hour, most were shut, tucked away against the winter, their wares hidden and protected. Yet as he walked, he noticed one stall that remained open, its lids lifted, the green panels standing like gentle wings against the night. The light inside was modest, perhaps a lamp set within the stall itself, and it warmed the pages and postcards so that the paper seemed alive under the glow. The stall looked like a small hearth made of books, a quiet fire that did not crackle but offered the same comfort, the promise of warmth held in something simple. The bookseller stood nearby, wrapped in a thick coat with a scarf wound carefully at the neck. He was not a young man, though not frail either. His posture had the calm endurance of someone who had learned how to stand in winter without resentment. His face was narrow, his eyes attentive rather than sharp, and his hands, bare despite the cold, moved gently over the stacks as if he were smoothing the night itself. He did not call out to Camille, did not invite him with urgency. He simply looked up, met Camille's gaze for a moment, and offered a small nod that resembled the cafe owner's earlier greeting. It was the same quiet permission, translated into a different setting. Yes, You may be here. Yes, you may take your time." Camille stepped closer and examined the offerings. There were old postcards showing Paris in earlier years, the ink slightly faded, the images softened by time, the river under a brighter sky, a boulevard crowded with hats, a garden path where ladies held parasols like pale blossoms. There were pamphlets and small books, some with gold lettering worn thin, others with plain covers that suggested modest contents. A few volumes of poetry lay stacked together, their spines creased as though they had been opened often and without care. Camille's fingers hovered above them, not touching yet, simply feeling the presence of the pages, as one might feel the warmth from a fire without placing a hand too close. The bookseller, seeing Camille's attention, spoke in a voice that matched the night, low, unhurried, and gentle in its cadence. He remarked that snow made the river quieter, and that the river, in return, made the snow seem kinder. It was the sort of sentence that did not aim to impress, only to offer a small truth. Camille responded with a soft agreement, and in that small exchange the embankment felt less empty. The bookseller reached into the stall and lifted a slender book, holding it as carefully as if it were fragile glass. He turned it so Camille could see the cover, a simple design, a title in restrained lettering, nothing ornate, nothing demanding. "For nights like this," the man said, and his tone suggested he was offering not merchandise but a possible companion. Camille took the book, feeling the coolness of its cover and the faint warmth lingering from the stall's lamp. The paper smelled like old drawers and ink and the quiet dust of time, a scent that carried no unpleasantness, only memory. He opened it at random, letting the pages fall naturally, and read a line or two without speaking. The words were calm and measured, describing a street in rain, a window lit at dusk, the comfort of returning home. There was no drama in them, no sharp turn, only the steady unfolding of detail. It was the kind of writing that seemed to lower the shoulders and loosen the jaw. Camille felt his thoughts slow further, as if the book had extended the cafe's warmth into the open air. The bookseller watched without pressing. Then, as if sensing that Camille was receptive to quiet stories, he offered one of his own. He spoke of a winter long ago when he had been a boy, when the river had seemed wider and the city had seemed larger, when each book in a stall had looked like a doorway into another world. On that night, he said, his father had brought him here and bought him a small volume of poems, telling him that Paris was not only a city of stone and industry, but also a city of words, and that words could keep a person warm in ways fire never could. He remembered walking home with the book pressed under his coat, the pages safe against his chest, and feeling as though he carried a secret lamp. The bookseller's voice did not rise or fall dramatically. It remained steady, and that steadiness made the memory feel true. As he spoke, snow continued to drift down, and the river continued to move under the bridges with its patient, sleeping motion. The lamps along the quay lit the flakes briefly, turning them into small falling sparks before they vanished into darkness or dissolved on stone. Camille listened and felt the city's quietness deepen, as if the story had settled into the night like another layer of warmth. The year's end did not feel like an edge anymore. It felt like a soft seam, carefully stitched, joining what had been to what would come without strain. Camille looked again at the slender book in his hands. He understood why it appealed to him. It did not shout. It did not demand attention with thick drama or loud feeling. It offered instead the simple companionship of gentle observation. The bookseller named a modest price, and Camille paid it without bargaining, not out of indifference, but out of respect for the calm exchange. The man wrapped the book in paper and tied it with a thin string. The movements practiced and tender, as though he were wrapping a piece of evening itself. When Camille slipped the book into the inside pocket of his coat, he felt its presence there like a small, steady weight. It was comforting, not heavy, like a warm stone held in the hand. He thanked the bookseller, and the man nodded as if gratitude were an ordinary part of the night's commerce. Camille began to walk again along the river, the snowfall continuing its patient descent, the lamps continuing their slow glow. The Seine lay beside him like a dark ribbon, quiet and untroubled, and the little book against his chest felt like a chosen dream, ready to be opened whenever the world asked for softness. With the slender book tucked safely inside his coat, Camille Delaunay walked along the quay as though he carried a small, private warmth. The snow continued to fall with the same patient courtesy, neither thickening into a storm nor stopping altogether, simply drifting down in quiet assurance. Along the river, Paris seemed to fold inward, drawing its sounds closer to the stone, softening them so that even the occasional echo of footsteps beneath an archway felt like something placed gently, not thrown. The lamps cast their familiar pools of light, and the Seine accepted each reflection with a slow, unhurried tremble. Camille's mind, warmed by the café and steadied by the bookseller's calm story, moved as slowly as the river itself. He felt no need to chase the new year. It would arrive whether he watched it or not. Tonight, it was enough to wander and let the city offer him its quiet gifts. At first, the music reached him only as a suggestion, a faint shaping of sound beneath the winter hush. It was not sharp enough to name, only a soft rise and fall that seemed to come from somewhere ahead, carried along the embankment by a mild turn of wind. Camille paused and listened. The sound was delicate, as if it were being played for the pleasure of the room that held it rather than for the street outside. He walked again, slower now, and the music clarified into a waltz, its rhythm measured and tender, its melody neither triumphant nor sad. It was simply there, like lamplight, steady, warm, and capable of making the night feel kinder. He followed the waltz without effort. It did not pull him, and he did not pursue it with eagerness. He simply allowed his steps to turn in the direction where the music seemed slightly more present. The street he entered was narrower than the quay, lined with buildings that leaned close as if to keep one another warm. Snow gathered on ledges and iron railings, and the stones underfoot were damp and dark, reflecting lantern light in faint, wavering patches. Here, the city's grandness receded, and the neighborhood's intimacy emerged. Shutters, small doorways, a sign painted above a modest shop, the scent of wood smoke slipping out from somewhere unseen. The waltz drifted down the street like a ribbon of sound, and Camille walked beneath it as though beneath something soft. The building from which the music came looked ordinary. Its facade was unadorned, its door a simple dark wood with a brass knob dulled by many hands. A lamp above the entrance burned with a small flame, casting a gentle light that made the falling snow look almost like drifting lace. There was no crowd at the door, no laughter spilling out, no clamor of celebration. The waltz suggested life, but a quiet life, contained and careful. Camille stood for a moment on the threshold of the street, and a calm thought came to him, that he did not need an invitation to listen. Listening, after all, was the least intrusive of acts. It was a way of being present without demanding anything in return. He stepped into the building's entryway, where the air smelled faintly of polished wood and coal dust and winter coats hung to dry. A stairwell rose ahead, narrow but clean, the banister smooth under the palm from years of touch. The light here was dimmer, coming from a small lamp at the foot of the stairs. Its glow gathered in the corners, leaving the upper steps in soft shadow. The waltz now was clearer, still muffled by walls and floors, but close enough to feel like breath. Camille ascended slowly, not wanting to disturb the quiet with hurried steps. Each stair creaked faintly beneath him, but the sound was gentle, almost apologetic, and it disappeared quickly into the music above. As he climbed, the melody opened further, revealing itself in layers. A piano, certainly, played with restrained elegance, its notes round and warm. Perhaps there was also a violin, or a second instrument joining lightly, though the sound was softened enough that the ear could not insist on certainty. The rhythm was steady, guiding the listener in a slow turning. Camille found himself imagining a small room with polished floorboards, a few couples moving as if they were practicing not for a public performance, but for their own quiet delight. He imagined women in pale dresses and men in dark coats, their steps careful, their laughter subdued, the waltz a gentle rope tying them to one another and to the night. At the top of the first flight, the stairwell turned to a small landing. A door stood slightly ajar, and from the thin opening, the music flowed like warmth escaping a room. Candlelight flickered within, casting soft movement on the hallway wall. Camille stopped on the landing and did not approach further. He stood with his hand resting lightly on the banister, allowing himself to be a listener only, a quiet witness on the edge of someone else's evening. The waltz continued, unbroken, the pianist's hands moving in a calm arc that could be felt even without being seen. The melody was familiar in the way that many waltzes are familiar, as if the city had always carried such music within its walls, waiting to be heard on nights when the world slowed down. The door opened a little wider, and a man stepped into the hall carrying a tray with empty glasses. He was middle-aged, neatly dressed, and his expression was relaxed, as if he were not working so much as participating in a communal act of care. He noticed Camille and did not react with suspicion or annoyance. Instead, his gaze held mild curiosity, and then a quiet understanding. "You may listen," he said softly, in a tone that suggested the permission had always been there. "It is a gentle night. The music does not mind." Camille inclined his head in gratitude, the motion small and respectful. He remained where he was, not stepping into the room, content to let the doorway frame what he could sense. For a moment, the man lingered as if considering whether to speak further. Then he said, almost conversationally, that they were practicing for midnight, though they did not intend to greet it loudly. "Some people celebrate with fireworks," he murmured. "We celebrate with a melody that does not startle the heart." He smiled faintly, then carried his tray down the stairs with careful steps, the glasses chiming softly in response like tiny bells agreeing. Camille listened. The music filled his chest in a quiet way, as if it were smoothing the inside of him. The waltz's gentle repetition made time feel less like a line and more like a circle, turning, returning, never rushing. He found his thoughts loosening, drifting into calmer arrangements. He thought of the bookseller's story about words as a secret lamp, and it seemed to him that music could be another kind of lamp, invisible, yet capable of lighting the mind. The snow outside continued to fall, and he imagined it settling on roofs and ledges, like a soft hush placed carefully over the city. For a few moments, the waltz shifted into a quieter passage, a section where the piano's notes became more delicate, and Camille could hear, faintly, the sound of feet moving in time. Not loud steps, nothing that would shake the building, but a gentle brushing, the whisper of shoes over wood. The dancers, whoever they were, seemed to move with a tenderness that matched the night. Camille felt no envy, no longing to join. The listening was enough. In the doorway's warmth, he could participate without entering, could feel the rhythm without taking a partner, could let the melody turn him inward toward peace. The piece ended without flourish. There was no dramatic final chord, only a soft resolution, like a sigh. Camille heard a quiet murmur from the room beyond, voices perhaps, or a low laugh. Then the pianist began again, starting another waltz with the same unhurried grace. It was as if the music were designed to continue, to carry the evening gently toward midnight without ever demanding attention. Camille remained on the landing, letting the new melody settle. He felt the steady warmth of the building, the faint scent of candle wax, the soft presence of other lives close by and yet not pressing. When he finally turned to descend, he did so slowly, as though he were leaving not a place, but a feeling. The waltz followed him down the stairs, growing fainter with each step, yet remaining clear in his mind. At the bottom, the building's entryway welcomed him again with its quiet smell of wood and winter coats. He opened the door and stepped back into the street, where the snowfall continued and the lanterns kept their steady glow. The waltz, now muffled behind walls, became once more a distant thread woven into the night. Camille walked on, carrying that thread with him. He felt as though the music had adjusted his pace, encouraging him to move even more gently, to place each step with care. Paris around him seemed to approve. The streetlights did not flicker. The snow did not hurry. The river, somewhere nearby, continued its patient flow, and within Camille's coat, the slender book rested against his chest, while within his mind, the waltz turned softly, turning the night into something calm, something almost magical, and perfectly suited for the quiet approach of a new year. After the stairwell's candlelight and the soft waltz that had lingered in his mind, the street felt even more hushed, as if the music had taught the air a gentler way to move. Camille Delaunay walked without hurry through the narrow lanes that folded back toward the brighter arteries of the city, though even there the brightness had been dimmed by snow and late hour. The falling flakes continued with their quiet patience, drifting into the lantern halos and dissolving into soft darkness. They gathered lightly along the edges of roofs, on the curved tops of iron railings, and in the shallow seams between stones where the city's lines became tender. Camille's breath rose and disappeared, and each time it vanished he felt a small relief, as if the night itself were taking his worries and letting them dissolve. He passed a few cafes still open, their windows glowing, but he did not enter. Their warmth remained available, yet he did not feel the need to collect comfort too quickly, as though he were afraid it might run out. The evening had a rhythm now, lantern to lantern, street to street, a slow wandering that felt less like movement and more like drifting. He could hear distant celebrations in certain directions, a faint chorus of voices, and an occasional burst of laughter that rose and fell like wind in trees. Yet those sounds remained far enough away to be only atmospheric, a reminder that joy existed elsewhere without forcing itself into his path. Camille preferred this quieter Paris, the Paris that spoke softly and asked for calm in return. At a corner where two streets met beneath a brighter lamp, he noticed a small stand sheltered by an awning. The awning's fabric was dusted with snow, and beneath it, arranged with quiet care, were bundles of flowers wrapped in brown paper. The sight felt slightly surprising in winter, not because flowers were rare in Paris, but because they seemed like an unnecessary tenderness for such a cold hour. Yet there they were, pale and gentle, like a soft voice offered into the night. A small lantern hung from the stand's frame, its light warm and close, creating a little island of gold in the snow's cool blue. Camille approached as though drawn by warmth, though the warmth was not only from the lantern. It was from the very idea of flowers waiting patiently at midnight. The seller stood behind the stand, bundled in a thick coat, her scarf wrapped high enough to soften her jawline. She was not young, but her face held an ease that made age feel irrelevant, as if her features had been shaped more by seasons than by years. Her hands moved with a steady gentleness, adjusting a ribbon, smoothing paper, touching the stems as if reassuring them. When she looked up at Camille, her eyes were calm and clear, not searching him for purpose, only acknowledging him the way a lamplight acknowledges a passerby. She did not call out. She did not offer bargains. Her presence suggested that people came to her not for necessity, but for a small act of choice. Camille paused at the edge of the stand and took in the arrangements. There were winter roses in pale cream, their petals tighter than summer's, as though they were conserving warmth. There were small chrysanthemums in soft yellow and white, humble blossoms that looked like quiet suns. There were sprigs of green, perhaps eucalyptus or another winter leaf, offering cool freshness even in the cold. A few violets appeared in one bundle, their color deep and restrained, like a secret kept politely. The bouquets were modest. Nothing was extravagant. Everything seemed selected for tenderness rather than display. "You are out late," the flower seller said, and her voice was low, almost conversational, as if late hours were not unusual, but simply another kind of light. "So are you," Camille replied, and the words came easily, gentle without effort. She smiled faintly, a smile that carried no flirtation and no performance. "Midnight brings certain people," she said. "Those who do not wish to shout. Those who prefer to hold something small in their hands." Camille felt the truth of that sentence settle into him. He looked at the bouquets again, imagining them in quiet rooms, set in simple vases, their scent mixing with warm air and candlelight. He imagined a flower carried home like a private blessing, or pressed into a book like a promise kept. The thought made him reach toward the bundles without touching, letting his fingers hover in the warmth of the lantern. "They are beautiful," he said, and meant it. The seller nodded, as if beauty were not a claim, but an observation. "Beauty can be quiet," she answered. "It can do its work without anyone noticing. That is often the best kind." Camille's gaze fell upon a single bloom tucked among the paper folds, one pale rose, not large, not dramatic, but held with a careful dignity. Its petals were the color of warm milk, and at the center there was a hint of deeper gold, as if it carried its own lamp within. He found himself thinking of the lanterns on Rue des Martyrs, of the cafe's windows like golden pages, of the waltz drifting from an upstairs room. All of these had been gentle lights offered into winter. A flower seemed like another light, even if it did not shine. It was a softness made visible. The seller followed his gaze. "That one," she said, not pushing, simply naming. "It is for a wish." Camille almost laughed, not loudly, only with the quiet amusement of someone hearing a familiar superstition spoken with sincere calm. "A wish? Yes," she said. "Not the kind people shout at the sky, not the kind they announce, a private one. You carry it with you, and you let it become true slowly." She held the rose carefully, lifting it as though it were fragile. Flowers know about slow becoming. They do not rush. Camille felt something in him loosen further, as if the evening had been gently untying knots he did not know he carried. He thought of the new year, of the new century, of all the voices insisting on progress and brilliance and speed. And then he thought of this rose and of the seller's calm certainty. The idea of a wish that became true slowly felt like an antidote, like a balm. "What kind of wish does it make?" he asked. The seller's eyes rested on him with quiet thoughtfulness. "The kind you need," she said. "For some, it is a wish for warmth. For some, it is a wish for rest. For others, it is a wish to be gentle with themselves." Her voice softened, as if speaking to the flower as much as to him. "Sometimes it is simply a wish to arrive at tomorrow without fear." Camille looked down at his gloved hands and then back at the rose. He did not feel dramatic emotion. He felt something simpler, a steady desire for peace, for the continuation of this calm he had found in the city's quieter corners. He realized he did not need to name the wish precisely. Perhaps that was the point. A wish, like a waltz, could be guided by rhythm rather than by words. "I would like it," he said quietly. The seller wrapped the rose in a small sheet of paper, folding it with care so the petals were protected, and tied it with a thin ribbon. The gesture had the tenderness of a ritual, though no ceremony was spoken aloud. She handed it to him, and when his fingers closed around the stem through the paper, he felt an unexpected warmth, not from the flower itself, but from the simple act of being given something delicate. He paid her, and the coins clinked softly in her palm, a small sound that felt strangely harmonious with the falling snow. Before he left, the seller spoke again, as if offering instruction without insistence. "Keep it close for a little while," she said. "Not to show anyone, only to remind yourself. Then, when you are ready, place it somewhere quiet. A glass of water will do, or between pages. Let it rest where you rest." Camille nodded. He slipped the wrapped rose into his coat pocket with the same care he had given the book, and the two objects, paper and petals, words and flower, felt like companions against his chest. He thanked her, and she replied with a small nod that felt like a blessing without being named. As he stepped away, the stand's lantern glow remained behind him, a small golden island at the corner, while the snow continued to fall, patient and steady, making the city look as if it had been softened by a kind hand. Camille walked on, and the world seemed subtly transformed by the presence of the flower. He was not suddenly joyous, nor suddenly changed. The transformation was quieter than that. It was as though he had been given permission to carry tenderness into the new year, to let it be an ordinary object in his pocket rather than an abstract idea. He passed under lanterns that glowed with the same steady warmth as before, and he noticed how the snow made their halos larger, more velvety, as if the city were leaning into softness. Somewhere far away, a cheer rose and faded. Somewhere nearer, a door closed gently, and within Camille's coat, the rose rested in its paper wrap, holding a private wish that did not need to be spoken aloud to begin becoming real. With the rose tucked safely inside his coat and the slender book resting close to his heart, Camille Delaunay continued through the snow-softened streets as if he carried two small pieces of the night's gentleness. The city's chill no longer felt like an adversary. It was simply an element, like water in the river or stone beneath his feet, present, but not personal. Snow had begun to settle more clearly now, not in heavy drifts, but in delicate layers that brightened the edges of steps and curbs. The lanterns along the streets made the flakes glitter briefly as they fell, and then the flakes disappeared into the darker folds of doorways and the shallow shadows beneath balconies. Paris seemed dressed in a quiet sheen, as though it had been brushed lightly with powdered sugar. Camille walked at a pace that matched the snowfall, unhurried and steady, letting the city's slow rhythm hold him. He found himself on a broader boulevard where the buildings stood taller and the street felt more spacious, yet even here the night had muted the usual bustle. Shop windows were darkening one by one, their displays now mere silhouettes behind glass. A few cafes still shone warmly, and the occasional figure moved along the sidewalk with shoulders slightly hunched against the cold. But the grand excitement that people often associated with Paris was somewhere else, gathered in pockets of celebration beyond his immediate world. Here, the boulevard felt like a wide corridor in a quiet house, a place to pass through gently, with respect for those who might already be sleeping. A carriage approached from behind, and Camille heard it before he saw it. The soft, steady roll of wheels on damp stone, the faint jingle of harness, the slow, patient breath of the horse. He stepped slightly to the side, not because it threatened him, but because the act of making space felt natural, like moving aside for a thought to pass. The carriage drew level and continued, its lamps casting a mild yellow glow that slid across the snow like warm butter. Through the window, Camille glimpsed a passenger, a silhouette, perhaps a man in a hat, perhaps a woman wrapped in fur, sitting quietly, not animated, not gesturing, simply being carried through the night as one might be carried through a dream. As the carriage moved away, Camille watched it with a kind of gentle fascination. There was something soothing about its pace, its purposeful slowness. It did not rush. It did not demand the street's attention with clamor. It simply existed as a moving pocket of warmth, passing through the winter like a calm idea passing through the mind. He realized that the sound of carriages in Paris was a sound of continuity. It belonged to the present, yes, but also to memory. It was a sound that had rolled through these streets for years, carrying letters, lovers, weary workers, and quiet travelers. Even as the city spoke of machines and new inventions and the bright speed of the future, the carriage remained, patient and steady, a reminder that not everything needed to move quickly to be true. Another carriage passed a few minutes later, this one smaller, a modest fiacre with a driver bundled high in his collar. The horse's hooves made a dull, comforting rhythm, and the wheels followed like a low accompaniment. The carriage's movement seemed to stitch the street together, connecting one pool of lamplight to the next. Camille noticed that his own thoughts were matching that rhythm. They were no longer leaping from concern to concern. They were moving in slow procession, each one arriving softly, lingering briefly, then rolling on. He thought of the bookseller's words, of the flower seller's gentle advice, and of the waltz that had turned above the stairwell. Each memory came to him without urgency, like a carriage arriving at a quiet corner and waiting politely. The boulevard's trees stood bare, their branches traced with a thin line of snow that made them look like careful drawings against the dark sky. Camille walked beneath them and felt as though he moved under a canopy made of winter lace. The air smelled of cold stone and faint smoke, and sometimes, when a cafe door opened briefly, he caught a warm breath of coffee or bread that slipped out and then disappeared again. Those brief scents felt like small invitations that did not require an answer. Paris was full of such invitations, he realized, warmth offered without pressure, beauty displayed without demand. He came to an intersection where a wide street crossed the boulevard, and here, the city's celebratory distant noises were a little more noticeable. There was a swell of voices somewhere farther down, and a flash of brighter light that suggested a gathering beyond his line of sight. Yet even this felt softened by snow and distance. It was as if the city had placed a thick curtain between its louder joy and its quieter rest, allowing each to exist without disturbing the other. Camille preferred this balance. He did not resent celebration. He simply did not need it to be close. At the corner stood a lamppost with a public clock mounted on it, its face pale under the gaslight. Camille glanced up. The hands were moving slowly toward midnight, but they did not seem to threaten anything. The approach of the hour felt gentle, like a tide rising rather than a door slamming. People spoke of midnight as a moment of rupture, as if time would break and reform. Yet standing here, watching the clock's patient progress, Camille felt that time was not breaking at all. It was continuing, smoothly, quietly, like the river. The new year would arrive not with violence, but with inevitability. And inevitability, when viewed calmly, could be a comfort. A carriage stopped near him, its driver calling softly to someone inside. The door opened, and a woman stepped out, her boots meeting the snow-dusted street with careful precision. She wore a dark coat and a hat that caught a few flakes along its brim. She did not appear hurried or excited. She looked instead as though she were arriving at a place of quiet importance. A home, perhaps, or a friend's door. The driver tipped his head, the woman thanked him, and the carriage rolled on again. The exchange was simple, ordinary, and yet it held a tenderness. A person delivered safely through winter night, a small gratitude spoken, a brief acknowledgement of shared humanity. Camille resumed walking, and the image stayed with him. He thought of how many such exchanges occurred every day, unnoticed and uncelebrated, yet forming the true fabric of the city. Not the grand events, not the fireworks, not the declarations of progress, but the quiet acts. A door held open, a fare paid honestly, a lamp lit at the right hour, a flower wrapped carefully in paper. These were the things that made Paris feel livable, and on a night poised between centuries, they seemed especially precious. Perhaps, he thought, the best way to cross into a new time was not by shouting at it, but by carrying forward these small kindnesses intact. The snow thickened slightly, enough that Camille's shoulders began to collect a faint dusting, and his hair caught a few flakes that melted slowly against his warmth. He did not mind. The sensation was gentle, like the lightest touch. He imagined the city being quietly covered, each rooftop receiving a new softness, each street becoming a little more muted, a little more hushed. Even the carriages seemed to roll more quietly now, their wheels cushioned by the thin layer of snow. The sound they made was almost like brushing, a soft whisper that could lull the mind. Camille's thoughts turned inward, but not in an anxious way. He considered his own small year that was ending, the routines, the days that had passed, the evenings that had been lonely, and the ones that had been calm. He did not judge them harshly. He saw them now as a series of quiet carriages, each carrying a portion of his life from one place to another. Some had been heavier, loaded with worry. Some had been light, carrying nothing but ordinary contentment. Yet all had moved forward, steady and inevitable. And here he was, still walking, still breathing, still able to receive the city's softness. He reached into his coat pocket for a moment, feeling the wrapped roses' presence. The paper was warm against his fingers, and he imagined the flower inside, patient and delicate, holding its private wish without needing to announce it. Then his hand brushed the book's edge, and he felt its firm, quiet weight. Words and petals, two forms of softness, rested against his chest like gentle companions. Camille lowered his hand and continued along the boulevard as another carriage passed, its lamps sliding across the snow. He watched it go with a calm mind, as though watching a thought drift away without needing to follow it. The street ahead offered more lanterns, more quiet corners, and somewhere, perhaps, another warm door. Camille did not hurry. He let the night guide him, as it had been guiding him all evening, with steadiness and gentle intention. Above, the sky remained deep and patient, and below, Paris moved softly beneath its snow, carrying people through the last hours of the century in carriages that passed like quiet thoughts, present for a moment, then gone, leaving behind only the calm assurance that the night and time itself could move with kindness. The boulevard gradually narrowed again, as though Paris were gently guiding Camille Delaunay away from its wide corridors and back toward its smaller, more intimate rooms. Snow continued to settle with patient delicacy, and the lanterns along the side streets glowed like softened stars brought down to human height. Camille walked without a map and without concern, following the mild logic of warmth and light. Somewhere in the web of streets, the city's louder celebrations gathered and stirred, but they remained at a respectful distance, like music heard through several closed doors. Here, the night belonged to quiet footsteps and the tender hush of falling snow. When Camille saw the café again, he recognized it not only by its sign, but by its windows, which still shone like golden pages against the dark street. The glow was steady and inviting, and it made the snowflakes drifting past look like little sparks floating in slow motion. For a moment, he stood outside, watching the interior through the glass as he had earlier, and the scene was much the same. The counter lit warmly, a few figures seated with unhurried posture, a lamp's circle of light resting on tabletops like calm attention. Yet there was something different too, subtle but present, as if the room had become even quieter as midnight drew nearer. The café seemed to be settling into a deeper form of comfort, like a voice lowering itself when it senses that someone is getting sleepy. Camille entered, and the bell above the door chimed softly, polite rather than announcing. Warmth met him again, fragrant with coffee and baked flour and the faint sweetness of something simmered. The owner, a broad-shouldered man with a calm face and hands that moved as though they had learned to do everything without hurry, looked up and greeted Camille with a nod. There was recognition now, the small familiarity created by shared warmth. Camille returned the nod and moved toward the counter, removing his gloves slowly. The world outside had left a thin chill in his coat and hair, but inside, that chill began to dissolve at once, as if the café's air were a gentle solvent. He did not need to ask for anything. The owner poured him a small cup of coffee, darker than before, and slid it across the counter with an ease that suggested understanding. Camille took it and felt the warmth in his palms. The café at this late hour felt less like a public place and more like a shared living room, a refuge where those who had not sought crowds could rest. The knitting woman had gone. The chessboard sat abandoned on a table, pieces left mid-game as if the players had drifted away without concern. A man near the window dozed lightly with his hat tilted forward, his posture relaxed, his face softened by sleep. The room's murmurs were lower than they had been earlier, and even the clink of porcelain seemed careful not to disturb the night. Camille took his coffee to a corner table, but he did not sit immediately. He looked upward, noticing, as he had not before, the stairwell door behind the counter. It was a narrow door painted a dark color, easy to miss if one did not look for it. When the owner noticed Camille's gaze, he wiped his hands on a cloth and approached, his expression still calm, still unhurried. "You are walking a long night," he said softly, not as a judgment, but as an observation. "The city feels quieter than usual," Camille replied, as if it is trying not to wake itself. The owner's mouth curved into a faint smile. "Paris knows when to soften," he said. He glanced toward the stairwell door. If you wish to warm yourself more fully, there is a room above. Not grand, only simple. My sister keeps it for evenings when the streets become heavy with winter, and a person needs a place that feels like home for a while. Camille felt surprise, but it was gentle surprise, the kind that comes when the world offers something kind without being asked. For guests? He asked quietly. For those who are quiet, the owner said, and his tone made it clear that quietness was a form of trust. It is late. The new year approaches. Some people prefer to watch it with noise. Others prefer to meet it with warmth. He looked at Camille in a direct but unpressing way. You may go up if you like. Camille hesitated only long enough to feel gratitude. He did not want to impose. Yet something in him, perhaps the steady calm he had been collecting all night, told him that this invitation was not casual. It was offered with purpose, as though the cafe owner understood that wandering could be sweet, but rest could be sweeter. Camille nodded. "Thank you," he said, and his voice carried a sincerity that felt almost like a confession of relief. The owner took a small key from beneath the counter and led Camille to the stairwell door. The door opened into a narrow staircase that rose in a gentle curve, its wooden steps worn smooth by years. The air there was warmer than the street, but cooler than the cafe, as if the building held different layers of comfort. Camille climbed slowly behind the owner, the coffee cup now empty and left downstairs, his hands free except for the quiet weight of the book and the wrapped rose in his coat. The stairwell smelled of wood and soap and something faintly floral, like dried lavender tucked into a drawer. Halfway up, the owner paused to light a small lamp fixed to the wall, and its glow created a soft, intimate brightness that seemed designed to soothe rather than illuminate. At the top of the stairs, the owner opened a door into a small room that immediately felt like a private shelter. It was not large, but it was arranged with care. A simple hearth in the corner held a low fire, not roaring, only steady, its flames moving slowly behind a small grate. A woven rug lay on the floor, and the rug's colors were muted as though chosen to calm the eyes. A narrow bookshelf stood against one wall, holding a few volumes, poetry perhaps, and a couple of novels with worn spines. A chair with a rounded back sat near the hearth, and another chair faced the window, which looked out onto the street below. On a small table, a kettle rested beside 2 cups, ready to be used without fuss. The room did not try to impress. It simply offered the kind of comfort that does not need to announce itself. "My sister is sleeping," the owner said softly, as if the room itself might be disturbed by louder speech. "But she keeps this prepared. Sit, warm your hands." He gestured toward the chair near the fire. "The kettle is for tea if you wish. The window opens if you want the snow's sound, and if you want nothing but quiet, the room understands that too." Camille stepped inside and felt warmth wrap around him more completely than in the cafe below. Here, the warmth was not only in the air, but in the silence, in the way the furniture seemed to wait patiently, in the small domestic details that suggested someone cared enough to prepare this space for another person's comfort. He took off his coat slowly and draped it over the back of a chair. Then, with careful hands, he removed the wrapped rose and set it gently on the table. He placed the slender book beside it, the paper wrapping and the string neat and undisturbed. Seeing them there made him feel as though he had brought his night's quiet treasures into a place worthy of holding them. He sat by the hearth and extended his hands toward the fire, not too close, just near enough to feel the steady heat. The flames moved slowly, and their light flickered against the wall in calm, repeating patterns. Outside the window, snow continued to fall, and the lanterns on the street cast their familiar halos, now softened further by the flakes. The sounds from below were muted. The faint chime of the cafe's doorbell, a quiet murmur, then stillness again. The city's distant celebration remained distant, barely more than a suggestion. Up here, in this warm room, the world seemed to narrow to gentle essentials: firelight, a window with snow, a chair that supported the body, and quiet that supported the mind. Camille leaned back and let his shoulders sink into the chair's curve. He felt a subtle shift, as if his body, which had been walking and watching and listening, had finally been given permission to stop. The warmth loosened his fingers, and the room's calm loosened something deeper. He thought of the year ending, but the thought did not feel heavy. It felt like looking at a river behind him, something that had flowed, something that had carried him, something that could now continue without his attention. He thought of the new year approaching, but it did not feel like a challenge. It felt like the next room in a familiar house, already prepared, already waiting. He stood again only to make tea, moving with the same quiet care the bookseller and flower seller had shown earlier. He filled the kettle, lit a small flame beneath it, and waited as the water warmed. The waiting was soothing, an invitation to be still. When the tea was ready, he poured it into a cup and held it between his hands, feeling the heat rise into his palms. The scent was mild, herbs perhaps, or a simple black tea. Nothing sharp, nothing demanding. He returned to the chair by the hearth and sipped slowly, letting each swallow be a small, calm ritual. As he drank, he watched the snow through the window. The street below looked quieter than ever, its stones pale where snow had settled, its lanterns glowing like gentle guardians. A carriage passed once, slow and muffled, its wheels hushed by the thin layer of snow. Camille watched it drift away, and the motion felt like a thought leaving the mind at the edge of sleep. He set the cup down and listened to the hearth's soft crackle. The room was doing what it had been prepared to do, holding him, warming him, easing him toward a deeper calm. In the gentle light, the wrapped rose on the table looked like a small sleeping thing, tucked into paper like a blanket. The book beside it seemed equally restful, its pages quiet, waiting. Camille felt that he had arrived somewhere important, not in the sense of grand destination, but in the sense of being exactly where he needed to be. Outside, Paris continued its slow preparations for midnight. Inside, the warm room above the cafe offered a different kind of celebration, one made of steadiness, soft firelight, and the quiet understanding that rest, too, is a way of welcoming a new year. The warm room above the cafe held Camille Delaunay as though it had been waiting for him all evening. The hearth's low fire did not flare or snap. It simply maintained its soft, steady work, sending heat into the air in slow waves that settled into furniture and bone. Outside, snow continued to fall in patient spirals, and the lanterns below cast their velvety halos upward through the window. Camille sat with his tea cooling gradually in its cup, his hands resting in his lap, and he felt that rare, quiet satisfaction that comes when the body is no longer asking for anything urgent. Even his thoughts seemed to have found soft chairs of their own, sitting down, leaning back, and letting silence do the speaking. After a while, he heard movement in the stairwell. Careful steps, not hurried, accompanied by the faint creak of old wood. The sound did not startle him. It was too gentle for that, like the shifting of a curtain in a mild draft. A moment later, there was a soft knock at the door, brief and polite, as though the person knocking did not wish to interrupt, only to announce their presence in the smallest possible way. Camille rose, his movements unhurried, and opened the door. A woman stood there holding a small lamp. Her hair was pinned back neatly, and the lamplight shaped her face in warm contours. She looked like the kind of person who belonged to quiet places, someone who understood the value of soft voices. "You must be the guest who prefers calm," she said, and her tone carried no surprise, only a mild curiosity and the warmth of welcome. "I am," Camille replied, and he felt a slight embarrassment at being described so accurately, though it was a pleasant embarrassment, like being offered a blanket you did not realize you needed. "I am Elise," she said. "My brother told me you were here. He said you walked the night gently." She glanced into the room, and her eyes softened as she took in the hearth and the teacup. "Good. This room does its work." Camille stepped aside to let her enter. She moved with quiet confidence, as though she knew every board and corner. She set her lamp on the table near the rose and the book, and the additional light layered itself over the firelight, making the room feel even more intimate, as if the walls had come a little closer to shelter them. Elise's gaze fell briefly on the wrapped rose. She did not ask about it. She only nodded, as if she understood that some objects arrived in a person's pocket for private reasons. "I keep something else upstairs," she said, lowering her voice as though speaking to the room itself. "Not in this room. In the little chamber beyond the back hall. It is not important, but it is comforting. A collection of ordinary things." She smiled faintly, and the smile made the word collection sound less like pride and more like tenderness. On nights like this, some people like to look at objects that have already lived through time. It reminds them that time can pass without harm. Camille's curiosity stirred, but it was a calm curiosity, without urgency. "A collection?" he asked. "A small museum," Elise said, and her tone suggested she knew the word was grand for what she meant, and that she found the grandness gently amusing. Nothing official, nothing rare, only pieces of life that would otherwise be forgotten. She looked at him as if offering him a choice, not a performance. "If you would like to see it, you may. If you would rather sit and listen to the fire, you may do that too." Camille felt the quiet invitation settle into him like warm tea. He realized that he did want to see it, not for excitement, but for the softness of being shown something cared for. "I would like to," he said simply. Elise picked up her lamp again, and Camille followed her out of the room and into the back hallway. The corridor was narrow and dim, the walls close, the air smelling faintly of soap and old wood. The building felt like a lived-in book, worn at the edges, comfortable in its familiarity, with small secrets tucked into its chapters. Elise moved slowly, ensuring Camille's steps remained quiet, and in that unspoken care, he felt himself being guided not just through a building, but through a certain way of existing, one that refused to rush, one that treated the night with respect. She opened a door at the end of the hall, and the small chamber beyond looked less like a museum and more like a carefully arranged attic room. Shelves lined the walls, and a simple table stood in the center, with a few objects placed upon it as though they were in conversation. The room was warm enough to be comfortable, though cooler than the hearth room, and the lamp's glow filled it with a gentle amber. Nothing glittered. Nothing demanded attention. Yet Camille felt immediately that each item had been chosen with intention, and that intention itself was soothing. Elise set the lamp on a shelf and turned to him. "I began this without meaning to," she said. "A button found on the street, a ribbon from a parcel, a ticket stub, a small clock that stopped. Things people drop without noticing, as if they are shedding tiny pieces of their days." Her voice remained low, as though she were speaking in a library. It felt wrong to let them disappear entirely, not because they are valuable, but because they are gentle proof that life is made of small moments. Camille stepped closer, his gaze moving along the shelves. There were buttons, pearl, brass, bone, arranged in small bowls. There were spools of thread in faded colors, their labels worn, their ends neatly tucked. There were theater tickets, yellowed at the edges, with elegant printed lettering. A small bundle of postcards lay tied with ribbon, their images softened by time. Gardens, bridges, street corners. There were keys that no longer belonged to any known lock, placed together as if they still held their own quiet purpose. On one shelf, pressed leaves rested between glass panes, their veins visible like delicate maps. On another, a small music box sat with its lid closed, a modest object that seemed to hold a song without insisting on playing it. Elise lifted a spool of ribbon, pale blue, frayed at the ends, and held it up in the lamplight. "This was wrapped around a gift," she said. "I found it on the pavement in spring. The gift was received, I suppose. The ribbon did its work, and then it was discarded." She smiled faintly. "But I liked the idea that even a ribbon deserves to be remembered for a while. It held something together. It made an offering look beautiful." She set it down again carefully, and the care in her hands made the ribbon seem almost alive. Camille listened, and something in him softened further. He realized that Elise's museum was not an attempt to preserve grandeur. It was an attempt to honor the unnoticed. In that, it felt perfectly suited to this night, poised between centuries. The world outside spoke of great changes and bright futures, yet here, in this small chamber, the emphasis was on the quiet continuity of ordinary life. The objects were not impressive, they were comforting. They suggested that time could be gentle, that it could pass and leave behind small traces like petals pressed in a book. Elise opened a small wooden box and showed him a handful of old theater tickets. These were for evenings when people dressed nicely and sat in velvet seats and watched stories unfold on a stage, she said. Most of those stories are forgotten now, but the tickets remain. They remember that someone once sat there, breathed there, laughed softly or cried quietly, and then went home. She returned the tickets to the box and closed it. That is enough, I think. It is enough to remember that people lived. Camille's eyes fell on a tiny clock sitting near the edge of a shelf. It was no bigger than his palm, its face cracked, its hands frozen at a certain hour. Elise followed his gaze. "That one stopped on a winter morning," she said. "I do not know whose clock it was. Perhaps it fell from a pocket. Perhaps it was thrown away when it broke." She lifted it gently and held it so the lamplight could touch the cracked glass. "I like that it does not move. It reminds me that even when time stops for an object, the world does not become cruel. It simply continues." She set it down again. "And if time continues, then there is always another cup of tea, another lantern, another warm room." The words settled into Camille like a quiet blessing. He looked at the shelves again, and now each object seemed to radiate a subtle warmth, not physical warmth, but the warmth of attention. The buttons were no longer just buttons. They were small survivors of coats and gloves, witnesses to hands that had fastened and unfastened them. The spools of thread were no longer just thread. They were the memory of repairs, of careful stitching done late at night. The pressed leaves were no longer just leaves. They were autumn held still, kept from disappearing entirely. Camille felt a calm gratitude for Elise's gentle impulse to collect, to remember without clinging. "You could call it boring," Elise said quietly, as if she were reading his thoughts, though her tone held no defensiveness. "Some people like exciting museums. They like crowns and jewels and battles. I prefer this." She gestured around the room. "These things do not frighten anyone. They do not shout. They simply say, 'A life passed here, and it was made of small kindnesses.'" Camille found himself nodding. "It is comforting," he said, and the simplicity of the statement felt honest. Elise's expression softened further. "Good," she said. "Comfort is not a small thing." She took up the lamp again, and its glow moved gently across the shelves, causing tiny shadows to shift like slow breath. "Midnight is coming," she added, "but we do not need to meet it with noise. We can meet it with attention. We can meet it with gentle proof that time can be held without being seized." They left the little chamber and returned through the narrow hall, the building quiet around them. When they stepped back into the warm room, the hearth still glowed patiently, and the wrapped rose and slender book waited on the table as if they had been keeping watch. Elise set the lamp down and adjusted it slightly so the light fell more kindly across the room. Camille sat again in the chair by the fire, feeling as though he had been given not only warmth, but perspective, the knowledge that the Belle Époque, for all its grand talk of progress, was also made of humble objects and quiet acts. Elise did not linger long. She offered Camille another cup of tea. Then, with the same gentle efficiency, she moved toward the door. "Rest here," she said softly. "Let the fire do its work. Let the snow continue outside. The new year will arrive gently, whether you watch it or not." She nodded once, a small gesture that felt like a promise, and then she slipped away, her footsteps fading down the hall like a careful thought leaving the mind. Camille remained by the hearth, the room warm, the night soft beyond the window. He looked at the wrapped rose in the book, and he imagined them joining Elise's little museum someday. Two ordinary things from a winter night that had been made extraordinary only by gentleness. The idea soothed him. Time, he realized, did not need grand monuments. Sometimes it needed only a quiet room above a café, a lamp placed carefully on a table, and a person willing to pay attention to the small, comforting evidence that life could pass through the world without leaving scars. The warmth of the hearth room lingered on Camille Delaunay's skin, even after he rose from the chair, as if the fire had placed a gentle mark on him that would not fade quickly. Elise's little museum of ordinary things remained in his mind as well, not as a list of objects, but as a feeling, the calm knowledge that life was stitched together from small, tender traces, and that those traces could be honored without being dramatized. Camille stood for a time at the window, watching the street below where the lanterns continued their steady work. Snow fell more fully now, still light, still polite, yet frequent enough that the air seemed filled with drifting whiteness. It was as though Paris were being slowly tucked in, layer by layer, by the patient hand of winter. He did not feel restless, but he felt a quiet desire to walk again, to let the snow and lanterns meet him in motion. The room had given him shelter. Now he wanted the city's softness. He put on his coat with unhurried care and took the wrapped rose from the table, holding it briefly as if to acknowledge its private purpose. Then he placed it back into his pocket, close to the warmth of his chest. The book remained there already, the paper wrapping smooth beneath his coat's lining. When he stepped into the hallway, the building's quiet embraced him once more, and the stairwell seemed to descend gently, as if it too were unwilling to hurry. Downstairs, the café was quieter than before. A few patrons lingered, their faces softened by late hour, their voices low. The owner gave Camille a calm nod, as though to say, "You are free to go, and you are free to return." Camille nodded back and stepped out into the night. The cold met him again, but it no longer felt sharp. Snow had altered the air, thickening it slightly, making it feel less like glass and more like cloth. The street's sounds were muffled. Even his own footsteps sounded softer, as if the city were encouraging him to move gently. Camille turned toward the boulevards, drawn by their long lines of lamps and trees, by the way they offered space for slow walking. Yet the boulevards he found now were not the bright, busy avenues of daytime. They were quiet corridors of snow and light, the branches above traced with white, the benches along the sidewalks dusted softly, their iron arms curved and dark beneath the powder. The buildings stood in long, dignified rows, their stone facades pale under the lantern glow. In many windows, curtains were drawn, and the rooms behind them looked asleep. Here and there, a window remained lit, and that single square of brightness felt intimate, like a person still awake reading by lamplight. Snow continued to fall, steady and unhurried, and Camille felt as though he were walking inside a slow, gentle dream. The flakes did not sting his face. They touched and vanished, cool and brief, like a whisper of winter. They gathered on his coat's shoulders and along the brim of his hat, then melted gradually from the warmth of his body. The lamps along the boulevard cast wide halos, and in those halos the snow seemed almost golden, drifting in thick, slow spirals that made the light appear alive. Camille watched the movement again and again, letting his gaze rest on it until his thoughts quieted further. The snowfall was not dramatic. It was simply persistent, and persistence, when it is gentle, becomes soothing. A carriage passed at a distance, its lamps dimmed by the curtain of falling snow. The horse moved steadily, its hooves barely audible. The carriage seemed to float rather than roll, gliding through the softened street, as if the city's usual hardness had been temporarily removed. Camille watched it recede and felt the calm satisfaction of seeing something move without haste. Even the driver's posture suggested patience, his shoulders relaxed beneath layers of coat, his hands steady on the reins. The carriage disappeared into the white haze, leaving behind only the faintest trace of its passing, and the street returned at once to quiet. Camille walked beneath a line of bare trees, their branches arching overhead like the ribs of a great, sleeping animal. Snow collected on the branches in delicate ridges, outlining each twig with pale light. The trees did not sway. The air was calm enough to let them remain perfectly still, as though they were holding their breath for midnight. Camille felt his own breathing slow in response. He could hear the faint sound of snow landing, so soft it was almost imagined, and the occasional distant murmur from somewhere far away where people were gathering for louder celebration. Yet those sounds did not intrude. They remained distant, blurred by snow and space. Here, on the quiet boulevard, the night felt private, even though it was shared by anyone who happened to be walking. At an intersection, Camille paused and looked down another avenue where the lamps stretched in a long, glowing line. The perspective was calming, the repetition of light and shadow like a pattern meant to lull the mind. He thought, without strain, of how many winters had passed through Paris and how the city had always found a way to soften itself. Stone did not change quickly, and yet the city's mood could shift with weather and light. Tonight, the mood was tenderness. It seemed to seep from the lanterns and the snow into everything else, altering even the way a person held their shoulders or placed their feet. As Camille walked, he began to notice small details that the snow made more visible. A wrought iron gate, usually dark and severe, looked gentle with white powder gathered along its curves. A statue in a small square wore a thin cap of snow, making its stern expression appear almost amused. The steps of a building, dusted lightly, looked like something softened for bare feet, though no one would walk them so. Even the cobblestones, usually uneven and hard, seemed smoothed by the thin layer, their edges blurred as if the city had been sketched in softer pencil. Camille felt that the snow was not only covering Paris, but translating it into a quieter language. He passed a small kiosk where newspapers had been stacked earlier, now closed, its shutters drawn. Snow gathered along the edges of the shutter slats like delicate embroidery. The scene made him think again of Elise's collection. Ordinary objects given attention. Even the kiosk, closed and silent, seemed worthy of notice. It would open tomorrow, and people would rush to buy headlines about the new century. Tonight, it slept, wrapped in snow, and that sleeping seemed like a wisdom, a reminder that even news could wait. In the distance, a faint brightness suggested a place where crowds might be gathered, perhaps near the Grands boulevards or closer to the river, where people like to watch midnight arrive. Camille felt no pull toward it. He did not resent those gatherings. He simply did not need them. His celebration was this: the snow, the lanterns, the steady quiet, and the private warmth of objects in his coat pocket. He reached a hand inside briefly and touched the wrapped rose through the fabric, feeling the paper's slight crinkle. The rose felt like a small secret. He touched the book's edge too, the firm shape of it steady against his chest. These were his small companions, as real as the lantern light, as gentle as the snowfall. He walked onward until he came to a small square where the trees formed a loose ring around a patch of open space. The snow lay smoother here, undisturbed except for a few faint tracks. A bench sat beneath a lamp, its wooden slats pale with white. Camille sat down slowly, careful not to disturb the snow too much, and he allowed himself to rest in stillness. Above him, the lamp glowed steadily, and the snow fell through its light in thick, slow drifts. The sight was hypnotic, but not in a way that dulled the mind. It was hypnotic in the way a lullaby is. It draws attention gently, then releases it, leaving the listener calmer. From his bench, Camille could see the boulevard stretching away, the lamps receding into the snow like a necklace disappearing into fog. He listened. There was no sharp sound. Even the distant city seemed muted. His own heartbeat felt slower, quieter, like it was matching the snowfall's pace. He thought of midnight approaching, but the thought no longer carried weight. Midnight would come, and the snow would continue. Lanterns would continue to glow. The world would not crack open. It would simply keep breathing. After a few minutes, he rose again and continued walking, because the act of moving felt as soothing as sitting. Each step seemed to press the day's remaining tension into the snow and leave it there, softened and harmless. The boulevards, under snowfall, had become a gentle corridor between wakefulness and sleep. Camille felt himself drifting toward that threshold without resistance. Paris, wrapped in winter, felt like a lullaby sung in stone and light. The snow fell, the lamps glowed, the city hushed, and the night carried him forward with the quiet promise that the new year could arrive not as a shout, but as a soft settling of peace over everything that mattered. Camille Delaunay's wandering eventually carried him away from the small square and back along a boulevard that felt increasingly hushed, as though the snow were thickening into a kind of silence that could be touched. The lamps continued in their patient line, each halo widening in the softly falling flakes, and the city's stone facades looked gentler than they did by day, their edges blurred into calm. Midnight was nearer now, though the air did not tighten with anticipation. It only grew quieter, like a room settling after a long conversation. Camille walked as if guided by that quiet, his footsteps placed carefully, his shoulders relaxed beneath his coat, his breath slow and steady. Somewhere far away he could sense the existence of crowds and bright laughter, but they remained distant and muffled, like a memory heard through thick curtains. At a modest corner where two streets met, Camille noticed a shopfront that was still lit. The glow was not bright in a celebratory way, nor theatrical. It was a small, constant light, like a bedside lamp left on for comfort. The sign above the door was simple, a name painted in restrained letters, and beneath it, a small painted clock face that seemed more friendly than formal. Through the window, Camille could see shelves lined with timepieces, mantel clocks, pocket watches, small brass mechanisms, arranged with careful spacing as if each object needed room to breathe. The window glass had gathered a delicate film of condensation from the warmth inside, and in that softened blur, the ticking seemed almost visible, as though time itself were moving gently in the air. He paused outside for a moment, watching the quiet interior. The sight was oddly soothing, a room dedicated to time, yet free of haste. Camille felt a mild curiosity, not sharp but warm, and he reached for the door handle. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered, and the scent of the shop, metal, oil, old wood, and something faintly herbal, wrapped around him. The warmth inside was modest but steady, and it made his cheeks feel pleasantly aware of themselves. Behind a workbench sat an elderly man with silver hair combed back neatly, a magnifying lens resting near his hand. He looked up with calm attention, as though visitors at this hour were not common, yet not unwelcome. The clockmaker's eyes were clear and patient. He did not ask Camille what he wanted to buy, and he did not offer a speech. He simply nodded once, a gesture that carried the same quiet permission Camille had received all evening in different forms. On the workbench lay the open body of a pocket watch, its tiny gears exposed like the delicate bones of a small creature. The clockmaker's hands, when they moved, were careful and unhurried, as if haste would be a kind of disrespect. Somewhere in the shop, several clocks ticked at once. The combined sound was not loud. It was a gentle chorus, a soft, steady rain of tiny beats that made the room feel alive without making it busy. Camille removed his gloves slowly and stood near a shelf where a row of clocks displayed their faces. Some were ornate, with gilded edges and floral motifs. Others were plain, their numbers simple, their cases worn smooth by years of touch. One small clock had a face slightly yellowed, like old paper, and Camille found himself thinking again of Elise's museum, objects that had lived through time, carrying quiet traces of those who had held them. Here, the objects were not collected as memories, but as working companions. They were made to keep faith with the passing hours. Yet the shop did not feel strict or severe. It felt like a sanctuary where time had been asked to behave kindly. "I thought you would be closed," Camille said at last, and his voice sounded softer in this room of ticking, as though the clocks themselves encouraged restraint. The clockmaker smiled faintly, a small curve of the mouth that suggested understanding. "Many are still awake tonight," he replied. His voice was low, shaped by years of speaking to customers who listened closely. "Some want repairs before tomorrow, as if the new year should begin with perfect precision. Others come simply to look at the hands moving, to reassure themselves that time is still doing its quiet work." He gestured gently toward a chair near the workbench. "You may sit if you like. There is no need to stand. Time does not require it." Camille sat, and the chair's wooden seat was smooth and firm beneath him. From this vantage, he could see the clockmaker's hands more clearly. Hands marked by fine lines, strong despite age, moving with the tenderness one might use to close a child's coat buttons. The clockmaker returned his attention to the pocket watch, adjusting something almost invisible with a small tool. The ticking around them continued, steady and calm. Camille felt his thoughts slow further, as if his mind had joined the clocks in their patient rhythm. After a quiet interval, the clockmaker set the tool down and looked at Camille again. "You are not here to buy," he said, not accusing, only observing. "No," Camille admitted. "I was walking. The snow made the streets quiet. I saw your light." The clockmaker nodded, as though this made perfect sense. "Light is a kind of invitation," he said, "especially on winter nights." He turned slightly and reached for a small wooden box on the shelf behind him. From it, he removed a simple pocket watch, its case plain and unadorned. He did not hand it to Camille immediately. He held it in his palm, letting the weight of it settle, then opened it with a practiced thumb. Inside, the face was clean, the numbers crisp. The hands moved steadily, untroubled by the late hour. "Listen," he said softly. Camille leaned forward, and the clockmaker held the watch closer. The ticking was faint but clear, a tiny heartbeat. It was not urgent. It did not sound like a warning. It sounded like reassurance, steady, dependable, gentle. Camille felt an unexpected comfort bloom in his chest. The ticking did not ask him to hurry. It simply reminded him that time was continuing, calmly, whether he worried about it or not. "People speak of time as if it is a master," the clockmaker said. "They say it chases them. They say it punishes them. They say it runs out." He closed the watch and placed it on the bench as though setting down something fragile. But time is not only one thing. There is hurried time, yes. There is time measured by trains and appointments and loud promises. But there is also gentle time. The kind you find in snow, the kind you find in warm rooms, the kind you find in a quiet cup held between two hands. Camille listened without interrupting. The clockmaker's words had the measured cadence of someone who had lived long enough to understand that the truest lessons did not need emphasis. The shop's clocks continued their soft chorus, and the sound made the speech feel less like an opinion and more like a truth being supported by evidence. Camille thought of his own evening: lanterns, cafe warmth, the bookseller's calm, the upstairs waltz, the flower wrapped for a wish, the warm room above the cafe, Elise's collected buttons and tickets. Each moment had belonged to gentle time. None of it had been hurried, and yet the night had moved forward all the same, carrying him closer to midnight with quiet certainty. The clockmaker returned to the pocket watch he had been repairing, as if his hands needed their calm work in order to continue speaking. "Tonight," he went on, "people think they must greet the new century with noise, as if the future will not recognize them otherwise. But the future does not require applause. It arrives like the morning arrives. It arrives like water flows. It arrives in its own way." He adjusted the watch's inner mechanism with a tool so small it seemed made for dreams. A century can begin softly. It can begin with steadiness. It can begin with a promise made quietly and kept quietly. Camille felt the sentence settle into him. The idea of a soft beginning felt like a gift, an alternative to the bright, demanding vision of progress that filled newspapers and speeches. He imagined midnight arriving over a city blanketed in snow, not shattering the world, but smoothing it. He imagined the first hours of 1900 moving forward like the ticking in this shop, steady, patient, kind. His hand drifted instinctively toward his coat pocket, where the wrapped rose rested. He did not take it out, but he felt it there and thought of the flower seller's words about wishes becoming true slowly. Gentle time was exactly that. Slow becoming. The clockmaker finished his adjustment and held the repaired watch to his ear, listening. His expression softened, satisfied. He set it down, then reached beneath the workbench and produced a small cup and a simple pot. Without asking, he poured a little warm drink, tea perhaps, and offered it to Camille. The gesture was unceremonious, as though hospitality were simply part of the shop's quiet rhythm. Camille accepted, and the warmth in the cup added another layer of comfort to the room's steady ticking. "Here is my New Year promise," the clockmaker said after a moment, looking at Camille as though he were speaking not only to one man, but to the night itself. "Do not treat time as an enemy. Treat it as a companion. Walk with it. Let it walk with you. If you cannot be fast, be steady. If you cannot be steady, be gentle. That is enough." He paused, and the clocks seemed to tick a little louder in the silence, as if agreeing. "And when the new century begins, let it begin in your hands the way it begins in mine." Quietly, with care, Camille held the warm cup and breathed in the faint scent rising from it. He felt the snow and lanterns waiting outside, the city's hush continuing, the distant celebrations kept at a respectful remove. He felt, too, the calm solidity of the clockmaker's promise, offered without fanfare and therefore easier to believe. In a world eager to rush forward, the small shop insisted that steadiness was a form of wisdom. Camille finished his drink slowly, as though he were drinking the lesson itself, and when he stood to leave, he did so with a sense that he had been given something more durable than an object. At the door, he paused to offer thanks. The clockmaker nodded, returning to his bench, his hands already resuming their quiet work. Camille stepped back into the snow, and the cold met him again, but it felt softened by the warmth he carried. Behind him, the shop's light continued to glow, and within it, the clocks continued to tick, steady and gentle, as if practicing the calm rhythm with which the new year and the new century could be welcomed into the world. When Camille Delaunay stepped away from the clockmaker's shop, the door closed behind him with a soft, obedient sound, and the bell's chime dissolved almost at once into the snowy air. The street outside looked even calmer than before, as if the clocks inside had lent their steady patience to the night. Snow continued to fall in quiet layers, thick enough now to soften every outline. The lamps along the boulevard wore wider halos, their light turning the drifting flakes into slow golden dust. Camille walked without direction for a few minutes, letting the clockmaker's promise settle inside him as though it were a warm stone placed carefully in the pocket of his mind. Be steady, be gentle, and let time walk beside you. The words did not ring like advice. They rested like a blanket. He could feel, without looking, that the city was nearing its hour. There was a subtle change in the air, not a tightening, but a hush that grew more attentive. Somewhere far away, people were gathering, leaning toward midnight with their glasses raised and their voices held in anticipation. Camille heard the distant swell, muted by snow and distance, like waves heard from a warm room. Yet the boulevard where he walked remained composed. The trees stood still, their branches traced in white. The buildings held their quiet dignity. Even the occasional carriage moved slowly, as if it too had agreed that the night did not need to be hurried forward. Camille's feet carried him toward a familiar line of lamps, toward streets where he had already found warmth and gentle invitation. The city seemed to guide him with repetition rather than surprise. Each corner offered another lantern. Each lantern offered another small pool of light. The snow underfoot muffled his steps until he felt he was walking on cloth rather than stone. He slipped a hand into his coat pocket and touched the wrapped rose. The paper was softly crinkled now, warmed by his body. Beneath it, the flower remained delicate, waiting. In the inner pocket, the slender book pressed lightly against his chest, its presence steady, its pages quiet, words and petals, two small forms of comfort. He found himself grateful for the way the night had given him objects that could be held. As if comfort were sometimes easier to trust when it had weight, he reached a street corner where a lantern hung a little lower than the others, casting a particularly warm circle of light. The snow seemed to favor this place, drifting through the glow in thick, slow swirls. Camille paused beneath it, not because he was tired, but because the lantern's light felt like a gentle hand resting on his shoulders. From here, he could see down the street in both directions, the lamps receding into soft white haze, the facades pale and calm. A cafe window glowed somewhere farther along, and for a moment Camille imagined the warm room above it, the hearth still patient, the chair still ready, Elise's lamp perhaps turned low. The thought made him feel as if he already had a place to return to, a safe harbor in the night. He stood still and listened. There was no sharp sound nearby, no shouting, no sudden movement. Only the faint brush of snowfall and the far-off murmur of celebration held at a respectful distance. It was strange and soothing to feel the city waiting without trembling. Camille watched the snow, letting it occupy his attention fully. Each flake fell with its own quiet purpose, touching light briefly, then fading into shadow or settling onto stone. The motion was repetitive, tender, and it pulled his thoughts into a slower rhythm. He thought of the clockmaker's shop again, the chorus of ticking that had filled the room like soft rain. The snow fell like that ticking now, each flake a tiny beat, steady and unhurried, making time feel less like a line and more like a gentle pulse. Then, from far away, a sound rose, a swell of voices, a low cheer, softened by the snow, but unmistakable. It did not crash into the street where Camille stood. It rolled toward him like a distant tide, then broke gently and receded. A moment later, there was another cheer, and another, and in between them, the quiet returned. Camille realized that midnight was arriving, not with a single violent moment, but with a gradual blooming of sound at the city's edges. Paris was welcoming the new year in its own many ways, some loud, some soft, some private. Here, beneath this lantern, the welcome was almost silent. Camille looked up at the lantern's glass. The flame inside burned steadily, protected from wind, held carefully in its metal frame. It seemed almost symbolic in its calm persistence. The light did not flare at midnight. It did not change. It simply continued, doing the same gentle work it had been doing all evening, making the next steps visible, warming the air with its glow, offering quiet reassurance. Camille found comfort in that. If a new year could arrive and the lantern could remain steady, then perhaps the world did not require sudden transformation. Perhaps it required only continuity, softened by kindness. A faint sound, perhaps fireworks far away, perhaps only a sharper cheer, reached him like a distant echo. It was quickly swallowed again by snow and stone. Camille did not feel the urge to move closer. He did not feel left out. Instead, he felt oddly privileged to stand in a pocket of calm while the rest of the city celebrated. It was as if he had been given a private balcony above time, a place from which to observe the turning without being compelled to perform it. The new century, so loudly discussed in newspapers and speeches, did not arrive as a parade in this street. It arrived as a soft change in the air, a sense of now shifting slightly, like the moment when a kettle begins to sing and then settles again. Camille's hand returned to his coat pocket and rested on the wrapped rose. He remembered the flower seller's words about a wish that became true slowly, and he realized that he did not want a wish that demanded midnight's drama. He wanted a wish that belonged to gentle time. He wanted something that could grow quietly, without applause, without pressure. Beneath the lantern, he let himself form it, not in elaborate phrases, but in a simple feeling: rest, warmth, steadiness. He wished for those things to remain possible, for himself and for others, as the year began. He wished for the new century to hold more soft rooms than hard corners. He wished for the world to remember the value of small kindnesses, of teacups and book pages, and careful hands repairing watches and ribbons that once held gifts together. He did not speak the wish aloud. He did not need to. The lantern's light seemed to accept it anyway, bathing the snow in warmth, illuminating the quiet street as if saying, "Yes, this too is a celebration." Camille exhaled slowly, and the breath rose like a pale ribbon into the cold air, then vanished. In that vanishing, he felt a gentle release, as if something he had carried all year had been loosened and set down. As the distant cheering continued in soft waves, Camille noticed that the city's lights looked slightly warmer than before. It might have been his imagination, or the way the snow reflected the lamps more richly, but the effect was real in his perception. Paris seemed to glow from within. Windows that were lit looked kinder. Lanterns looked softer. Even the shadows had become more velvety, less severe. It was as if midnight had not changed the world's structure, but had changed its tone, shifting everything a step closer to tenderness. Camille began walking again, leaving the lantern behind, though its warmth stayed with him as an afterimage. The street remained quiet, and the snow continued to fall. He passed another lamp, then another, each one steady and calm. The distant celebration remained distant, never pushing itself into his path. He felt the new year settling around him like a shawl, lightly, warmly, without weight. For the first time in a long while, the future did not feel like something rushing toward him. It felt like a room already prepared, with a chair near a hearth, a book waiting on a table, and a small flower resting in paper wrap, ready to be placed somewhere quiet. And with that thought, Camille walked on through the soft streets of Paris, carrying midnight not as a loud moment, but as a gentle, steady presence beside him. After midnight, Paris seemed to exhale. The distant cheering, which had risen in soft waves, began to thin and scatter, dissolving into the snowy air like breath fading on glass. The city did not fall silent at once, but it loosened, the way a gathering loosens when the moment it was waiting for has arrived and passed. Somewhere far away, laughter still drifted along a boulevard, and an occasional sound, perhaps a final burst of fireworks, perhaps only a door closing, reached Camille Delaunay as a faint echo. Yet around him, in the quieter streets he had chosen, the night remained composed, wrapped in snow and lantern light, as if it had decided that the new year should begin in softness rather than spectacle. Camille walked back toward the café with the warm room above it, guided by memory and by the gentle repetition of lamps. The streets he followed looked subtly different now, not because midnight had transformed them, but because snow had continued its slow work. It lay a little thicker on windowsills and ledges, and it gathered in the shallow grooves of the cobblestones like pale sugar. The trees along the boulevards wore heavier outlines of white, their branches traced as though someone had carefully drawn them anew. Camille's footsteps left faint impressions that filled quickly behind him, as if the city wished to smooth away evidence of movement, preserving its calm. He felt no urgency to arrive, but he felt a quiet certainty that the warm room was waiting, steady as the clockmaker's promise, ready to receive him again. As he turned onto the familiar street, he saw the cafe's windows glowing, still like golden pages held open in the night. The light was slightly dimmer than earlier, as though the room below had lowered its voice in respect for those who were growing sleepy. Snowflakes drifted past the glass in slow motion, catching the warm glow before sinking into darkness. Camille paused outside for a moment, letting the sight settle into him like reassurance. He thought of the evening's gentle offerings, the bookseller by the sleeping Seine, the waltz floating down a stairwell, the flower seller at midnight with her quiet talk of wishes, Elise's museum of ordinary things, and the clockmaker's steady words about gentle time. Each memory felt like a lantern of its own, placed along the path of his night. When he entered the cafe, the bell chimed softly, almost apologetically, and the warmth met him at once. The room was nearly empty now. The man who had dozed near the window was gone. A server wiped a table with slow, economical movements, her expression calm. The owner stood behind the counter, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up, preparing to close without haste. He looked up at Camille and nodded, as if Camille's return was expected in the same natural way. Morning is expected after night. No questions were asked. The owner merely lifted a cup and poured a small amount of warm drink, tea, perhaps, then placed it on the counter and slid it toward Camille, with the same quiet generosity he had shown earlier. Camille accepted the cup and let his hands wrap around it, feeling heat seep into his fingers. He did not drink immediately. He stood in the warmth and listened to the cafe's subdued sounds, the cloth moving over wood, the faint clink of a cup being set down, the soft crackle of a small fire somewhere deeper in the building. In this nearly empty room, the city's celebration felt very far away, as if it had belonged to another Paris entirely. Here, Paris began the new year, like a home begins a morning, with quiet chores, warm drinks, and a gentle respect for rest. The owner gestured toward the stairwell door, and Camille understood without needing words. He finished his tea slowly, placing the cup back on the counter with care. "Thank you," he said, and the owner nodded, his gaze steady. "Sleep well," the man replied simply, and the phrase carried the weight of something sincere, something that mattered. Camille climbed the stairs again, and the stairwell's familiar scent of wood and soap greeted him like a clean sheet. The lamp on the wall cast a soft glow, and each step creaked faintly in a way that felt almost comforting, like a house speaking in its sleep. When he opened the door to the warm room, the hearth's low fire was still alive, as though it had been tended with quiet attention while he wandered. The room's warmth enveloped him immediately, and he felt his body respond with relief, as if every muscle recognized the promise of rest. The window still showed the street below, where lanterns continued to glow and snow continued to fall, patient and steady, as if the night had not noticed that the calendar had turned. Camille removed his coat and hung it over the chair with deliberate care. He moved slowly, as though the world might fracture if he rushed, though he knew it would not. Then he took the wrapped rose from his pocket and placed it on the table. The paper had softened slightly from warmth, and the ribbon's knot remained neat. He untied it gently and unfolded the paper with the same careful hands the flower seller had used. The rose inside looked tender, its petals still holding their pale warmth of color. Camille found a small glass, simple, clear, and filled it with water from the kettle's container. He placed the rose into it, adjusting the stem so it stood without strain, then set the glass near the hearth, where the light was kind, but not too hot. The gesture felt like completing a small instruction, not dramatic, but satisfying. It felt like giving the wish a quiet place to rest. Next, he took the slender book from his inner pocket and removed the paper wrapping and string. He placed the book on the table and ran his fingers lightly along its cover, feeling the modest texture beneath his touch. He did not open it yet. He simply let it be there, ready, like a calm companion. The room seemed pleased by these small arrangements, as if it approved of objects being given their proper place. Firelight flickered gently across the table, and the rose's shadow moved softly on the wall, slow and rhythmic, like the echo of the waltz he had heard earlier. Camille poured himself another cup of tea, not because he needed it, but because the ritual felt soothing. He sipped slowly, letting warmth travel through him, and then he settled into the chair by the hearth. The fire's crackle was quiet, and its light was steady, and the combination made his eyes feel heavier in the most peaceful way. He sat for a long moment without forcing himself to think. The room did not require him to be insightful or productive. It required only that he exist within it, breathing, warming, and letting the night do its gentle work. Outside, a final carriage passed, its wheels muffled by snow, its lamps dim and distant. The sound drifted through the window and vanished like a thought passing through the mind just before sleep. Camille watched the snow for a while. It fell in slow, steady motion, and the lanterns on the street below turned each flake into a small glimmer for a heartbeat before it settled. The city seemed to be tucking itself in, street by street, window by window, with the patient kindness of winter. Camille felt himself being tucked in as well, not by hands, but by warmth, by steady light, by quiet. He reached for the book and opened it at random, letting the pages fall where they wished. He read a few lines, not quickly, but slowly enough that each word felt like a soft step. The writing was calm, describing ordinary scenes in a way that made them feel gentle and worthy. Camille read only as much as he needed, then closed the book again, as if shutting a door softly so the room behind it could remain warm. He placed the book on the table beside the rose, and he looked at both objects for a moment with quiet gratitude. They were small, ordinary, and yet they felt like the night's gifts, proof that comfort could be carried and placed down gently. As the fire continued its soft glow, Camille leaned back and let his eyelids lower. His breathing slowed. The warmth in the room held him, and the snow beyond the window continued its steady descent, untroubled by time. The new year had arrived without noise in this room, just as it had arrived without noise under the lantern on the street. It had arrived like a shawl settling on shoulders. It had arrived like the last note of a waltz resolving into silence. In the quiet, Camille formed one final thought. Not a worry, not a plan, but a simple wish offered to the night itself, that rest would find those who needed it, that warmth would remain possible, that gentle time would continue to exist even in a world eager to rush. The firelight flickered softly as if listening, and the lanterns outside continued their steady glow. May your sleep be deep and untroubled, the kind that feels like drifting snow and warm lamplight, and may the new year hold you gently as Paris held Camille in a calm and tender embrace.